So in 1900, there were no seed oils. Most doctors had never even seen a heart attack. How do you get oil out of a sunflower seed? They're not very oily. You have to extract it with hexane, which is contaminated with benzene. If they didn't do this industrial process, it wouldn't even be palatable for humans. We've been misled. The average American eats the equivalent of 5 tablespoons of seed oils per day. Being sold to you as safe and healthy by Harvard and Mayo because it lowers your cholesterol based on a faulty paradigm is a major, major driver of illness in humans today.
Seed oils.
Yeah, this is a good one.
Seed oils is something I've been wanting to dive in with somebody for a while now. So what is it with seed oils?
So in 1900, there were no seed oils, essentially. Maybe the first seed oil was like 1860, but there were no seed oils in the American food chain until 1911 when Procter & Gamble made Crisco, which was partially hydrogenated cottonseed oil. But so in 1900, there were no seed oils. And this is just an association, but I think it's an important thing to note for the whole conversation because inevitably when we talk about seed oils, we will talk about saturated fat. So rates of heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, obesity, every chronic illness were a fraction of what they are today in 1900. And we were eating 99% of our fat as beef tallow, butter, ghee, and lard. There were no seed oils. And olive oil wasn't a big portion of our diet in 1900. There was no such thing as avocado oil. So most of our fat was animal fat in 1900. And the association there is striking to say, okay, we've had periods in recorded history not too long ago when we had almost all of our cooking fat was animal fat. And heart disease wasn't through the roof. So any hypothesis, any assertion that saturated fat causes heart disease needs to be questioned on historical basis from the get-go. Seed oils came in 1911. Procter & Gamble made Crisco. They had slow adoption into our food supply, I would say, over the next 40 years. In 1940s, with World War II, canola oil was produced for the first time, and it was used on ships because the seed oils stay slippery when they're wet. They're used as engine lubricants. Previously, they've been engine lubricants or lamp oils. So 1940s, canola oil gets produced. Canola is an acronym that stands for Canadian Oil Low Acid. There's no such thing as a canola plant. It's a rapeseed plant. So that's just a canola oil sidebar, and I'll come back to canola oil. And then since 1940s, we've had the introduction of various oils into our food supply. Soybean oil, corn oil, canola, safflower, sunflower, peanut. These are all seed oils. Anything that comes from a seed is a seed oil in terms of an oil that comes from a seed. It's important to understand that olive and avocado are fruit oils, and I'll talk about those later, but those are not seeds. We don't make avocado oil from an avocado seed. We make it from the actual avocado pulp, from the fruit. And olives are made from the fruit of the olive, not the seed of the olive. So there's a big difference. When you make an olive or an avocado oil, you just press the fruit, right? If you've seen an olive press, they either do it by centrifuge where they spin it and the oil goes out, or they have a big press and they kind of press the oil out and the oil comes out. How do you get oil out of a cottonseed or a soybean? They're not very oily. How do you get oil out of a sunflower seed or a kernel of corn? You have to go through this complex industrial process to refine the oil out of those things. So this is an interesting thing to consider. Today, in 2025, the average American eats the equivalent of around 5 tablespoons of seed oils per day. 1900, we had 0. To get 5 tablespoons of seed oil from corn, you'd have to eat 70 ears of corn. So you have to use massive amounts, 2.5+ pounds of soybeans to make 5 tablespoons of soybean oil. Similar figure with sunflower seeds, right? So these are historically inappropriate amounts of consumption of these substances. We never would have been exposed to this historically. Hunter-gatherers, they eat seeds and nuts sometimes, but mostly when they're starving. I didn't see the Hadza eat a single seed or a nut when I was there. So to get oil out of these things, which we've done because of an industrial process that makes oils that are cheap, very profitable, and have very shelf stable, you have refining, bleaching, deodorizing. So you have to heat the oil to over 450 degrees Fahrenheit, which essentially damages the oil, oxidizes the oil, makes it rancid. You have to extract it with hexane, which is contaminated with benzene. You have to do sodium hydroxide washing. You have to deodorize and bleach, because if they didn't do this industrial process, it wouldn't even be palatable for humans. So what you end up with on the back end is this historically inappropriate concoction of something that is now marketed to humans as a healthy oil. Well, how can that possibly be? It's clearly an industrial hyper-processed food. Well, the whole reason that seed oils are told to us as healthy is because of the cholesterol idea. So we kind of have to talk about cholesterol anytime we talk about seed oils. So 1900, no real heart attacks in the population. Most doctors had never even seen a heart attack. Heart attacks became a thing in the zeitgeist in the United States in the 1950s when Eisenhower had his first heart attack. And I think it was 1955 that he had his first heart attack. And that was around the time of a guy named Ancel Keys, who was very sort of opinionated. And he did this study called the 7 Countries Study, which he published later, that associated saturated fat consumption with higher levels of cholesterol and heart disease. But in retrospect, we know that he cherry-picked the data. He excluded countries where that association doesn't actually hold true. He included countries where it did hold true, but then he excluded places like France, Germany, and Switzerland where they eat a lot of saturated fat, but they don't have higher rates of heart disease. But nevertheless, this faulty study based on cherry picking, because of Ancel Keys' sort of persuasiveness and this obsession with heart disease in the 1950s, because Eisenhower had multiple heart attacks, and Eisenhower's cardiologist, Paul Dudley White, was influenced by Ancel Keys, we suddenly began to believe as an American people that saturated fat, which raises cholesterol in many individuals, and we can talk about that, is a cause of heart disease. And then we'll table the discussion about cholesterol as a cause of heart disease for the moment, but we'll get back to that. So for years and years now, USDA policy around dietary guidelines has been based on the paradigm that saturated fat causes heart disease. And so if saturated fat causes heart disease, it must be bad. We must eat less butter. We should be eating margarine instead of butter, right? Tallow has gone out of our population. Most people don't even know what tallow is. You never see lard. What's healthier is Mazola corn oil. And there are ads from the 1960s and 70s from Mazola corn oil saying like, Susie polyunsaturated her family tonight. They're so funny to see. Like the companies were proud of the fact that they were using these polyunsaturated oils because for so long, we have been told that polyunsaturated fats are heart healthy and saturated fats are heart unhealthy. And we've got it all reversed. It's all backwards. It's all backwards. So the reason it's backwards is because polyunsaturated fats are fragile and they become incorporated into all of the membranes of our cells. And there are multiple studies showing that when we have more polyunsaturated fats in our diet, specifically seed oils, this LDL, which is often termed bad cholesterol, is more likely to oxidize, more likely to become damaged in our bloodstream. And that leads to heart disease in so many steps. Again, we also have to talk about the cholesterol piece and the heart disease piece with all this. So it's a little involved and it's tricky. But the idea is that polyunsaturated fats lower cholesterol a little bit. Saturated fats raise cholesterol a little bit. So we've been told the polyunsaturated fats are healthy, and yet humans are eating less saturated fat, more polyunsaturated fats, and rates of heart disease are still skyrocketing, right? So it didn't do anything. It didn't fix the epidemic of heart disease. Clearly, we've missed the boat here, and I would say we went in the completely wrong direction, especially since the 1980s. The consumption of soybean oil as the major seed oil consumed by humans has gone through the roof. And I mentioned this earlier in the podcast. You can look at human fatty tissue, adipose tissue, and you can see that over the last 60 to 80 years, we are really polyunsaturating ourselves. When we eat polyunsaturated fat, we hold on to it. Our bodies don't make polyunsaturated fat. Do you remember earlier when I talked about pigs and chickens as monogastric animals? These animals don't make polyunsaturated fats either. Ruminants can make polyunsaturated fats. So they don't hold on to polyunsaturated fats. They can get rid of them and they can make them. We cannot make polyunsaturated fats. So we need a little bit. And historically, as humans, we had a small amount of polyunsaturated fat in our diet, both as omega-3 and as omega-6. And omega-6 is the linoleic acid. Omega-3 is the kind of stuff you get from fish, generally speaking. Omega-6 and omega-3 have different pathways in the human body in terms of the downstream metabolites. We'll talk about that also. But historically, we never had much omega-6, 1% of our calories. Today, 10 to 15% of our calories is omega-6. Some people have 20% of their calories as omega-6 fatty acids. So we have a historical inconsistency here in what we're doing as humans. And that should raise the alarm. That should challenge us to ask questions. But because of the cholesterol piece, because this lipid hypothesis has been at the center of medicine for so long, since the 1950s with Eisenhower, and we've been told that cholesterol causes heart disease, we have really, I think, we've been misled. And so the whole thing is kind of this house of cards, in my opinion. When you understand that cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease, and this pisses people like Peter Attia off, and I would love to debate him on this, because he really believes cholesterol does cause heart disease. All respect to Peter Attia, the whole house of cards falls.
No matter where you're watching Sean Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.